Immigration papers, immigration check, now. Ask it, we've heard that before. Show us proof you're a legal resident.
Call my precinct to verify. I'm complying. I'm not resisting. This is unlocked. You're violating.
The Burger Barn on Hennepin Avenue was packed when it happened. Saturday afternoon, 2:17 p.m. The kind of Minnesota summer that turned cars into ovens and made the black top shimmer like water. Sarah Benson had pulled into the drive-thru on her way to drop her son at basketball practice. Still in civilian clothes, a gray hoodie, faded jeans, her son's Timberwolves cap resting on the dashboard. She just placed their order when 3 ICE agents emerged from an unmarked white van she hadn't noticed idling near the exit. Their body cameras were already rolling, recording what would become the most expensive fast food run in Minnesota history. If you're ready to see institutional racism taken down, like this video, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. And if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now, because you won't want to miss tomorrow's story of cops messing with the wrong people and finding out. Let me know in the comments if you enjoyed this story. Agent Derek Carlson led the approach. His partners, Agents Reeves and TR, spread wide in a tactical formation like they were courting something dangerous. Sarah saw them coming through her side mirror, read the spacing, the hands hovering near their belts, the body language of men who'd already made their decision. 15 years on, the force had taught her to catalog threats in seconds. Federal agents' immigration and customs enforcement patches visible on their vests, moving toward her SUV like she was already guilty of something. She knew where this was headed before Carlson reached her window. Her 10-year-old son, Elijah, sat in the passenger seat mid-sentence about a crossover move he'd been practicing. He stopped talking when he noticed the men approaching, his excitement fading into confusion. Afternoon, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, conducting a compliance check in this area. Need to see identification and proof of legal status. Carlson's voice carried that bureaucratic flatness, the tone of someone running through a script they'd memorized months ago. Procedure without thought, authority without question. Sarah kept her hands visible on the steering wheel. 15 years of wearing a badge had also taught her that sudden movements around armed officers ended badly. I'm a police officer, Minnesota PD, Lieutenant Sarah Benson. My badge and department ID are in my glove compartment. She gestured slowly toward the dashboard, making sure every movement was deliberate and clear. Everyone says there's something, Carlson replied. Not moving, not letting her move. Got any documentation on you right now, proving citizenship? The way he said it left no room for doubt. He didn't believe her. Sarah felt the familiar burn ignite in her chest. The anger that came from being treated like this in her own city, in her own neighborhood, at a drive-thru she'd visited dozens of times, wearing a hoodie and jeans on a Saturday with her son. My driver's license is in my wallet. My badge is in the vehicle. I've been with Minnesota PD for 15 years. If you call my precinct, they'll verify everything. We'll verify once we've established identity and status, Carlson said, his voice colder, now sharper. Elijah shifted in his seat, his small hands gripping his phone. Mom, it's okay, baby, Sarah said softly, keeping her eyes on Carlson. Stay calm. But it wasn't okay. Reeves moved to the passenger side, peering in at Elijah like he was searching for contraband. Tran positioned himself near the rear, cutting off any exit. The van blocked her from behind. She was boxed in. Sarah reached slowly for her wallet in the center console. Carlson's hand moved to his belt. Stop. Don't reach for anything. Step out of the vehicle. I'm retrieving my ID, Sarah said evenly, her training kicking in. You asked for documentation. It's in my wallet. Step out of the vehicle now. The demand hung in the air, heavy and final. Around them, the drive-thru continued its rhythm. Family ordering meals, kids laughing in back seats, the smell of grease and fries drifting through open windows. But a few people were starting to notice. A woman in a minivan 2 cars back pulled out her phone. A teenager in line at the window turned to watch. Sarah opened her door, slowly, hands raised where Carlson could see them. I'm complying. I'm Lieutenant Sarah Benson. Badge 3462, Minnesota Police Department. I'm unarmed. My son is in the vehicle. There is no reasonable suspicion for this stop. She said it loud enough for the body cameras, for the phones now recording from nearby cars, for anyone paying attention. Carlson grabbed her wrist the moment she stepped out, twisting her arm behind her back. Reeves moved in from the other side. The handcuffs were cold against her skin, the metal biting into her wrists as they clicked shut. Mom. Elijah's voice cracked high and terrified. It's okay, baby. Stay in the car. Don't move. Sarah kept her voice steady, even as her heart hammered. This is an unlawful seizure. I'm not resisting. I'm a Minnesota police lieutenant. This is being recorded. You're violating my Fourth Amendment rights. There is no reasonable suspicion. I'm a U.S. citizen. I was born in Houston, Texas. Carlson wasn't listening. He was already walking her toward the van, Reeves holding her other arm. TR stayed by the SUV, blocking Elijah's view. The bystanders were fully engaged now, phones out, recording. Someone shouted something Sarah couldn't make out. A car horn blared. Fries spilled from a forgotten bag onto the pavement. Sarah turned her head, trying to see her son through the tinted windows of her SUV. Baby, listen to me. Someone's going to call Aunt Vanessa. Her number's in my phone. Password is your birthday. Stay calm. A woman in a Burger Barn uniform rushed out from the building, her face twisted in confusion and alarm. She approached the SUV, speaking to Elijah through the window. Sarah felt the van door slide open behind her. They pushed her. Inside, the space dim and smelling of stale coffee and sweat. The door slammed shut, cutting off the sunlight, the voices, the last glimpse of her son. She sat on the narrow bench, hands cuffed behind her, and closed her eyes. This wasn't the first time she'd felt powerless in a system she'd spent 15 years serving, but it was the first time it had happened in front of her child. The first time the uniforms on the other side had been federal instead of local. The first time the consequences felt this immediate, this visceral. The van started moving. Sarah replayed the encounter in her mind. Every detail sharp and clear, the lack of probable cause, the refusal to verify her identity, the excessive force, the public humiliation. She cataloged it all, not as a victim, but as someone who understood the law, from both sides, from the badge she wore, and from the degree she'd earned in secret night after night, semester after semester, while her colleagues assumed she was just another cop grinding through shifts. That law degree, hidden from her department to avoid the whispers of overambition, the quiet resentment in a profession where women, especially black women, were already walking tightropes, was about to become her most powerful weapon. The van rumbled through the streets of Minneapolis, carrying her toward a holding facility she'd never seen from this side of the bars. Behind her, in the drive-thru she'd left behind, her son sat alone in an SUV, surrounded by strangers with cameras, waiting for someone to tell him his mother was coming back. Sarah opened her eyes. She would come back, and when she did, she would make sure this never happened to anyone else. The van turned a corner, and the city blurred past the tinted windows. Familiar streets rendered foreign by the view from inside a cage. Her Texas roots ran deep back through generations who'd fought for the right to exist freely in a country that constantly questioned their belonging. Freed slaves who'd marched, who'd organized, who'd refused to be silent. She'd left Houston for Minnesota, chasing a career in law enforcement, believing she could make a difference from the inside. And she had 15 years of solid work, commendations, respect from her peers, but none of it mattered when 3 agents saw her skin before they saw her badge. The law degree had been her quiet rebellion. Night classes, while Elijah slept at her sister's online coursework between shifts, she'd kept it secret not out of shame but out of strategy. In a department where ambition could be mistaken for arrogance, where a black woman rising too fast drew scrutiny, the degree was her insurance policy, her edge. Now handcuffed in the back of a federal van, she was grateful for every late night, every case study, every constitutional law exam, because she knew exactly what rights they were violating, and she knew exactly how to make them pay. The van slowed, then stopped. The door opened, flooding the space with harsh afternoon light. Sarah Benson stepped out into her next fight. The ICE facility smelled like industrial cleaner and old coffee, the kind of place designed to strip dignity before processing even began. Sarah was led through the intake area, still handcuffed, her wrists aching where the metal had dug in during the ride. Voices echoed off tile floors, agents shuffling paperwork, keyboards clicking, phones ringing in distant offices. No one looked at her. She was just another file, another number, another body moving through the system. They placed her in holding cell 6. Concrete walls painted institutional beige. A metal bench bolted to the floor. Fluorescent lights overhead that hummed with a frequency that drilled into her skull. The door clanged shut behind her, the sound final and absolute. Sarah sat down, hands still cuffed behind her back, and let the cold seep into her skin. Time moved differently in confinement. Minutes stretched into hours, each one marked only by the changing quality of light filtering through the small window near the ceiling. She counted her breaths, ran through the detention protocols she'd learned in training from the other side, analyzed every procedural failure she'd witnessed in the past 3 hours. No Miranda warning, no probable cause, no reasonable suspicion beyond the color of her skin in a suburban drive-thru. Fourth Amendment violations stacking up like evidence in a case she was already building in her mind. The door opened. Agent Carlson entered with a clipboard accompanied by a woman Sarah didn't recognize. Agent Voss, according to her nameplate. State your full name, Carlson said, not looking up from his paperwork. Sarah Benson, Lieutenant, Minnesota Police Department, badge 3462. Carlson made a note. Place of birth? Houston, Texas, January 14, 1984. Parents' names. This is unlawful detention, Sarah said, her voice measured. You have no legal basis for holding me. I've identified myself multiple times. I'm a sworn law enforcement officer. I'm a United States citizen. You've violated my constitutional rights. And every minute I remain here compounds your liability. Voss looked up at that. Something flickering in her expression, uncertainty maybe. Or the first crack of doubt. We're following standard procedure, Carlson said. Once we verify your claims, you'll be processed for release. You could verify with a single phone call. Sarah replied, you could have verified at the scene. Instead, you detained me without cause, handcuffed me in front of my minor child, and transported me to a federal facility. All of which is being documented by your own body cameras. She let the words hang there sharp and deliberate. The agents exchanged a glance. Voss left without another word. Carlson followed, the door slamming shut behind them. Sarah exhaled slowly, her mind cataloging the exchange. The hesitation, the lack of coordination. These weren't seasoned professionals executing a legitimate operation. These were agents, following orders without understanding the legal framework that was supposed to govern them. She'd seen it before in her own department. Officers who confused authority with correctness, who mistook procedure for justice. The difference was she'd spent 4 years in law school, learning exactly where those lines blurred, and how to sharpen them back into focus. The night classes had started 3 years into her career with Minnesota PD, after one too many encounters with department lawyers who spoke over her, dismissed her observations, treated her legal questions like inconveniences. She'd enrolled quietly, telling only her sister Vanessa, who watched Elijah on the night Sarah drove across town to lecture halls that smelled like old textbooks and ambition, constitutional law, criminal procedure, civil rights, litigation. She'd absorbed it all, while her colleagues assumed she was home watching Netflix, while her supervisors praised her solid police work without ever suspecting she was becoming something more dangerous than a good cop. She was becoming a cop who understood the law well enough to dismantle it. She graduated summa cum laude, passed the bar on her first attempt, and told no one. Because in a profession where being a black woman already meant navigating unspoken rules and invisible ceilings, adding lawyer to her identity felt like painting a target on her back. Overqualified, threatening, too ambitious for her own good. So she kept it quiet, filed the degree away like a loaded weapon she might need someday. Today apparently was that day. The fluorescent lights flickered. Sarah shifted on the bench, trying to ease the pressure on her wrists. Outside the cell, voices rose and fell. Footsteps echoed down corridors. Somewhere, a phone rang 17 times before someone answered. 3 hours and 42 minutes after she'd been detained, the door opened again. Agent Voss entered alone this time, her expression carefully neutral. We've confirmed your identity with Minnesota PD. You're clear to go. Sarah stood slowly, her legs stiff from sitting. I need your body camera footage. I need the incident report. I need the names and badge numbers of everyone involved in my detention. Voss hesitated. We'll have to process the request through official channels. I'm making the request now? Sarah said, and I want it documented that I'm making it. This was an unlawful detention. I was seized without probable cause, held for nearly 4 hours, separated from my minor child. I'm entitled to that documentation. Voss nodded, something like respect flickering in her eyes. I'll note it in the report. They removed the handcuffs in the intake area. Sarah rubbed her wrists, feeling the blood rush back into her fingers. A supervisor appeared somewhere higher up the chain with graying hair and a suit instead of tactical gear. He offered what he clearly thought was an appropriate response. We apologize for the inconvenience, he said, his tone suggesting this was all a minor bureaucratic hiccup. Standard procedure in these sweeps. You understand? Inconvenience, Sarah repeated, tasting the word. You detained a police lieutenant without cause, ignored her identification, traumatized her child, and held her for nearly 4 hours. That's not an inconvenience. That's a civil rights violation, and I will be pursuing legal action. The supervisor's expression hardened. You're free to file a complaint through the proper channels. I will, Sarah said, and I'll be retaining counsel. Expect to hear from my attorney. She walked out of the facility into the late afternoon sunlight, free but not whole, released but not vindicated. Her SUV was in the impound lot. Elijah was safe. Vanessa had picked him up from the drive-thru. The bystander who'd helped him had stayed until family arrived, but the damage was done. The fear was planted. The trust was broken. Sarah drove home in silence, her hands steady on the wheel, her mind already 3 steps ahead. Civil rights attorney, federal lawsuit, discovery phase, depositions, the entire machinery of justice that most people only glimpse from the outside. She knew it intimately now, from both sides. Do you think federal agents should face stricter oversight when demanding citizenship papers without clear cause? Drop yes or no in the comments below. Share why accountability like this matters, why it could prevent stories like Sarah from happening to everyday families just trying to grab lunch with their kids. Vanessa was waiting at the house when Sarah pulled into the driveway. Elijah burst out the front door, running across the lawn, and Sarah caught him in her arms, holding him tight enough to feel his heart beat against her chest. I'm okay, baby, she whispered into his hair. I'm home. But she wasn't okay. Not yet. That night, after Elijah finally fell asleep in her bed, curled against her, like he used to when he was smaller, Sarah lay awake staring at the ceiling. Her mind replayed the detention in loops, the handcuffs, the cell, the cold indifference of agents who saw her as a problem to be processed rather than a person to be respected. She thought about the law degree tucked away in her filing cabinet, the bar card she'd never activated, the potential she'd kept hidden for fear of repercussion. No more. Tomorrow she would call an attorney, not as a victim seeking sympathy, but as a plaintiff seeking justice. She would use every tool she had, the badge, the degree, the documentation, the witnesses, to dismantle the system that had failed her. Because this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every black mother pulled over for driving while brown, every citizen forced to prove their belonging in their own country, every child who watched their parent get handcuffed for the crime of existing. Sarah closed her eyes, her son's steady breathing beside her, the only sound in the dark. The fight was just beginning. Attorney Rachel Kowalski sat across from Sarah in a downtown Minneapolis conference room. Footage from the drive-thru paused on her laptop screen. The image froze at the moment. Sarah's hands went behind her back, Carlson's grip visible on her wrist. Elijah's face pressed against the SUV window. This is textbook Fourth Amendment violation, Rachel said quietly. No probable cause, no reasonable suspicion. Racial profiling captured on multiple cameras, her fingers drummed against the table. They're going to want to settle this quickly. Good, Sarah replied. Because I'm not interested in quick. I want a trial. Rachel looked up, surprise flickering across her face. Most clients in your position would take the settlement. Federal cases are expensive, time-consuming. I know, Sarah said. I also know that settlements come with NDAs. They bury the problem, protect the system, and guarantee it happens to someone else next month. I want this public. I want a verdict. Rachel studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Then we go to trial. The lawsuit filed 3 weeks later named the United States government and agents Derek Carlson, James Reeves, and Linda Tran as defendants. The charges were specific and damning. Unlawful detention, racial profiling, Fourth Amendment violations, infliction of emotional distress, deprivation of civil rights under color of federal authority. The evidence was overwhelming. Body camera footage from all 3 agents, cell phone videos from 4 bystanders, witness statements from the Burger Barn employee who'd comforted Elijah, testimony from Sarah's precinct confirming her identity and 15-year service record, medical documentation of the injuries from the handcuffs, psychological evaluation showing trauma in both Sarah and her son. The government's first settlement offer arrived 6 weeks after filing $50,000 in exchange for dismissal with prejudice and a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. Sarah didn't even consider it. The second offer came 3 months later, after discovery had begun and the extent of the documentation became clear. $200,000, same term. Rachel presented it carefully, laying out the risks of trial, the uncertainty of jury verdicts, the possibility of getting nothing. Sarah shook her head. What's the going rate for watching your mother get handcuffed while you're 10 years old? What's the market value of being treated like a criminal in your own neighborhood for no reason except the color of your skin? Rachel smiled. I'll let them know we're proceeding to trial. Sarah threw herself into the case with the precision of someone who understood both sides intimately. She spent evenings in Rachel's office poring over depositions, flagging inconsistencies in the agent statements, using her law degree finally publicly to identify weaknesses in the defense's arguments. The revelation of her legal credentials had come during her own deposition when the government attorney had condescendingly tried to explain Fourth Amendment precedent to her. I'm familiar with Terry v. Ohio, Sarah had said calmly, in Tennessee v. Garner, and where in the United States I have a JD from the University of Texas School of Law. I passed the bar exam 3 years ago. So when I tell you this detention violated clearly established constitutional rights, I'm not speaking as a lay person. I'm speaking as an attorney who documented every legal violation in real time while your clients were illegally holding me. The room had gone silent. The trial began on a cold morning in February. The Minneapolis courthouse packed with off-duty officers in uniform, community activists in solidarity shirts, and media crews documenting every moment. Sarah walked in wearing her dress blues, her service medals visible, her bearing that of someone who'd spent 15 years commanding respect in dangerous situations. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. Rachel played the synchronized footage, body cameras, and bystander phones, showing the same moments from multiple angles. The jury watched Sarah identify herself calmly, repeatedly, while the agents dismissed her. They watched her hands stay visible, her movements slow and deliberate. They watched Elijah's face crumple as his mother was handcuffed. They watched the summer sun shine indifferently on suburban injustice. Sarah's testimony lasted 2 days. She recounted her career, her commendations, the community she'd served. She described the detention in precise detail, the fear, the humiliation, the desperate need to keep her son calm while 3 federal agents treated her like prey. And then Rachel asked the question that changed everything. Lieutenant Benson, you've mentioned your awareness of the legal violations occurring during your detention. Can you elaborate on how you knew the agents were exceeding their authority? Sarah met the jury's eyes. I have a law degree from the University of Texas School of Law. I earned it while serving with Minnesota PD, taking night classes and online courses for 4 years. I kept it private because in law enforcement, especially as a black woman, being perceived as too educated or too ambitious can create professional obstacles. She paused. But during my detention, I used that knowledge to mentally document every constitutional violation. I knew they had no probable cause. I knew the detention exceeded reasonable scope. I knew my rights were being violated systematically, and I knew I'd need to prove it later. The courtroom was utterly silent. The defense tried to salvage their case, arguing reasonable actions based on area intelligence, citing unspecified threats that justified the sweep. but cross-examination tore the arguments apart. No intelligence reports produced, no documentation of threats, no explanation for why a police lieutenant with a visible Minnesota driver's license offering to have her identity verified constituted reasonable suspicion of immigration violations. The racial profiling was undeniable. The violation of rights was clear. The trauma was documented. The jury deliberated for 6 days. When they returned, the forewoman read the verdict in a steady voice that carried to every corner of the packed courtroom, guilty on all counts. The damages phase began immediately. Expert witnesses testified about Sarah's PTSD symptoms, the hypervigilance, the nightmares, the panic attacks triggered by seeing federal vehicles, about Elijah's anxiety, his fear of police, his disrupted sleep pattern, about the career Sarah had loved becoming a source of pain. Every uniform, a reminder of how the system had failed her. The jury awarded $16.7 million in compensatory and punitive damages. The courtroom erupted. Supporters cheered. Officers in the gallery stood in solidarity. Media crews rushed to file updates. The defense sat frozen, stunned by the magnitude of the verdict. Sarah remained still, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes closed. It wasn't about the money. It had never been about the money. It was about the precedent, the message, the undeniable documentation that what had happened to her was wrong, illegal, unconstitutional, and would not be tolerated. The aftermath moved quickly. Carlson, Reeves, and Tran were suspended pending internal review. The regional ICE office launched investigations into sweep procedures. Policy updates were announced. Carefully worded statements that avoided admitting systemic racism while promising vague improvements. Sarah retired from the Minnesota Police Department 6 months after the verdict, taking her pension and her service medals and walking away from the career that had defined her adult life. But she wasn't done fighting. She used part of the settlement to establish scholarships for underprivileged kids on Elijah's basketball team, ensuring that families who couldn't afford equipment or fees had access to the program. She funded community programs, youth mentorship initiatives, resources for single mothers trying to balance work and parenting. And she opened a legal aid clinic specializing in immigration detention cases and civil rights violations. She hired 3 attorneys, 2 paralegals, and a victim advocate. She worked cases personally using the law degree she'd hidden for years to dismantle the same system that had detained her. The work was quiet, methodical, unglamorous, no cameras, no press releases, just case after case of people whose rights had been violated, whose voices had been ignored, whose belonging had been questioned in their own country. Sarah Benson, the police lieutenant who'd been handcuffed at a drive-thru, became Sarah Benson, the attorney who turned personal trauma into systemic change. She mentored young lawyers, taught them to document everything, to trust evidence over emotion, to build cases so airtight that settlements became inevitable and trials became showcases of injustice. She spoke at law schools, sharing her story not for sympathy, but as a case study in how power underestimated becomes power unleashed. How quiet preparation meets sudden opportunity. How one person's resilience can ripple outward to protect countless others. Elijah grew up watching his mother transform pain into purpose. He saw the clients who came to her office desperate and left with hope. He learned that justice wasn't a single moment but a continuous practice. That strength wasn't about dominance but about endurance. That belonging wasn't something anyone could demand. You prove it was something you claimed through existence and protected through action. Years later, when reporters asked Sarah if she'd do it all again, the detention, the lawsuit, the public exposure, she considered the question carefully. "I wouldn't choose the trauma," she said finally, "but I'd choose the fight every time." Because her Texas roots ran deep back, through generations who'd refused to be silenced, who'd organized and marched and demanded recognition in a country built on their labor and sustained by their resilience. Freed slaves who'd fought for civil rights long before the phrase became a legal framework. Ancestors who'd known that freedom wasn't granted. It was claimed, defended, and passed forward to the next generation. Sarah had inherited that legacy, and she was passing it on. The drive-thru where she'd been detained installed a memorial plaque, not to commemorate her suffering, but to remind the community that injustice witnessed is injustice documented, that phones and cameras and witnesses matter, that ordinary people have extraordinary power when they choose to use it. Sarah Benson never returned to that burger barn. But every Saturday on her way to watch Elijah play basketball in a program she'd helped fund, she drove past it and remembered the fear. Remembered that power underestimated is still power. That truth documented and defended endures. That justice isn't spectacle, it's method. And in the quiet work of helping one client at a time, she found something the $16.7 million could never buy. Purpose that transcended the trauma, meaning that outlasted the pain. Legacy that would ripple forward long after her story faded from headlines. The summer sun still shone on Minneapolis drive-thrus. Families still ordered burgers and fries. Kids still practiced crossover moves before basketball games. But somewhere in that ordinary routine, in the space between ordering and paying, between leaving home and arriving at practice, Sarah Benson had drawn a line. This far, no further, not to her son, not to anyone. And the system had learned expensively, publicly, undeniably that some lines once crossed come with consequences too steep to ignore. If you like this video, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next story. Share this video with someone who would appreciate it. And let's keep building this community together. And before you go, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what stood out to you the most. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next.